Okay, comrades, we'll open the meeting. You're all very welcome to this meeting of Workers' International Network. Our speaker today is Aman Kafa, who's an Iranian Marxist, and he will talk presumably principally about Iran and the dangerous situation evolving there, but also about the Middle Eastern region in general. The recent attacks by Israel against Iran have resulted in dozens of people being killed, widespread damage, and the strategy of attacking Iran has been in the mind of Netanyahu for 20 years. For 2 decades, he's been threatening this issue, and this seems to be the opportunity that he is seizing. And even though he's claiming to have killed senior military figures and senior scientists in the nuclear program, the tactics adopted once they find the location of one of these people, they destroy the entire area, exactly what they're doing in Gaza. When they say they have identified an activist in Hamas, they blow up the entire apartment block or the entire area. So what's being pursued in Iran this time is no different. We should mention also right across the Middle East, the situation is getting worse by the day. The genocide that's undoubtedly now being perpetrated by Israel against the Palestinian people the issue of genocide is being taken up on a wide scale now across the globe. Even some of the regimes which previously were very supportive of Israel are now having doubts about the strategies that are being pursued and the genocidal practices being developed and carried through by the IDF. Israel have also initiated wars as well as in the West Bank and in Gaza. They've also become involved in the Lebanon. Even though the Syrian regime was overturned internally, Israel took advantage to seize territory and to attack Syrian forces as well. So the situation is getting worse every day. So it gives me pleasure to introduce our speaker, who's very well informed and widely experienced Marxist activist from Iran, Aman Kafa. So, Aman, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Finn. When we were talking about this meeting some few days ago, the idea was probably to talk about what's happening with regard to Palestine, the issue of Israel, and the changes that we're all witnessing across Middle East. The idea of seeing what had happened post Trump's trip to the Middle East, with the notion that the capital is going to move from one hand to the other. The idea that was widely said in the media, at least in the official media, to be a very, very positive point with regard to the changes or lifting of sanctions in Syria, alterations in terms of who is going to get what extra money that goes from one point to the other, and the fact that Trump did not go to Israel was all signs of something slightly different. And the background of that was the talks that was taking place between US and Iran directly. Situation just a couple of days after changed drastically from one point to the other. We have noticed that although the initiation of the idea of arriving at peace in Ukraine in 24 hours, arriving at the peace in Middle East in matter of days, if not less than that. The idea of having answers to everything by Trump administration after 5 months has shown that everything has becoming or taking another turn further towards more wars and more militarization. The hypocrisy across the whole US on one hand, the situation that is happening in the Middle East, the genocide that has been continuously taking place, and to a large extent, the sidetracking of European powers in the whole process led to some of the politicians, if you recall, during the last couple of weeks, have been saying, oh, they have reservations about the situation, or they have grave concerns about what's happening after the last 20 odd months of clear genocide. They just having still reservations, and they still think the right of Israel to defend itself means Israel can do anything it wants with impunity completely. Uh, in the whole region, everyone was noticing one thing, and that was that there is nothing coming out of this. It doesn't matter if you go to the human rights courts, it doesn't matter what goes on in the UN, it doesn't matter what the G7 and all the other states all are saying. Literally, there is no outcome, and the situation continues, and it continues to, from one point of what we thought that could not be any worse, to even worse scenarios. The movement of, or the changes from having the UN humanitarian rights in terms of provisions and distribution of aids even, or the trickle of the aid that was coming through was changed to another agency, this time overseen by the US and Israel. And everybody has noticed during the past 2 weeks that these are effectively baits, or if you like, ways of luring people towards the distribution points, and then snipers coming in and killing them one after the other. And everything has shown that there is nothing there to even be provided for the people of Palestine, and the complete embargo in every part. Over this time, everybody has seen this, that there is nothing they can hope to happen from the States. And this actually led to more pressure. It's been going for months, and this pressure has led to a range of different actions, which are not the actions that were typically formed by the states, but actions that were formed from below in a way. And these direct actions were intending to go and break this embargo and siege that we saw on Gaza, and the horrors that are taking place in the West Bank, and literally across anywhere where you see a single Palestinian or anybody who dare to say Israel is actually carrying out the genocide. And this has grown. Progress was made in terms of variety of actions. We saw some time ago the formation of the United Front of Workers against, or in defense of, the people of Palestine. Some 14, 15 different countries with a variety of unions, organizations, a large number of different people who actually thought enough is enough. So therefore there must be something done from the point of view of the working class in Middle East itself. Alongside it, we have seen actions taking place following the previous actions that we have seen from the dockers in Sweden, in US, to most recent ones in Italy, and then further in Marseille in France. And this has been growing as well. So there was a huge pressure that something needs to be done, and the only force that can do it, if you like, the main body that could actually enforce a change, could not be carried out merely through marches and demonstrations and protests in the streets, but it had to go somewhere where it actually puts pressure on the states to actually stop this genocide. And another one of those was, for example, the march and the caravan which started from Tunisia, another one which started in France, and then grew with further more other countries joining in to form what was effectively march or global march to Gaza. The protest actually did go there. The idea was that by 12th of June, everybody would gather in Cairo, and then a variety of people from members of the parliaments to huge number of lawyers and a variety of representatives from some 30 odd countries all getting together and forming the march. We saw a boat was supposed to actually go, the Madeleine boat, or the Madeleine ship rather, that was supposed to actually go, and it was confiscated in international waters. Similarly, the protests started in Cairo from 12. A large number of people did gather, and they started their marches and protest actions in Egypt. And then the idea was to move towards the border and being able to actually break through the siege and go to Gaza. The Egyptian authorities initially had not said anything in terms of barring the protest, but later on 15th, which is today, literally when the march started to go towards Rafah, and the Egyptian authorities and their security forces started to say that there is no immediate arrangement. This has to be pre-arranged. The pre-arrangement has not been agreed. And the idea was to disperse people. The dispersion was not to ask people to leave, but it was literally an attack on the protesters. A large number of them were put on buses. Passports were withheld. Some were deported. Some are still in detention, despite all of the efforts of the protesters to be allowed to move forward. That was not allowed, and therefore immediate detention and arrests have taken place, and deportations, as I said, has gone through. And we're still seeing the repercussions of that and the continuation of the protest and further actions by the Egyptian security forces. There have been lots of injuries along the way as well that has stopped any movement towards Rafah. In all of the senses, there is this notion across everywhere that it is not possible to rely on anything from the states. Israel has got complete immunity and can actually do anything it wants. There is no regard for any recognition of any of the conventions or anything else like that. And the rest of the world at most pays lip service and doesn't do anything about it. And this idea that despite all of the efforts, it begs the question, if everybody does not want this war, then why does the war happen? If all the states are condemning these actions, why does it happen? And this has actually, I think, led to further direct actions. And the scenario is such that what we see across in different countries is that the only thing that can actually stop this genocide is action from another part of society, the ones that has no interest in the whole thing, and that's literally among the working class and to a large extent humane people, civilized, if you like, consciousness of the world, that it is actually trying to put an end to this. The situation in Israel itself has not worked in the favor of the ruling body. When I say it hasn't moved in its favor, I don't mean that the Israeli society is actually raising up in arms against the Netanyahu state, far from it. But the idea is that people are seeing that this is not the answer. There were marches of people trying from Israel to move towards the borders, and they were also stopped by the Israeli security forces and arrests were made. And throughout the whole society, what everyone's seeing is the continuation of what it was before. It does not seem to make sense. Recent surveys are suggesting that the position of the ruling body in Israel, including that of Netanyahu, is not the situation that they expected it to be, especially after the claims of progress and winning and being able to crush every opposition. The situation, effectively the deadlock that mainly internationally and the isolation that Israel has been put under started another agenda. This time the agenda became the situation of Iran. The attacks that have taken place on Iran, which is what we've seen since Friday taking place, started about 3 a.m. Local time in Tehran, where Israel started bombardments in variety of places, large amounts of bombings, and the claims that they have been able to do the same thing as they had done with what they claimed as Hezbollah in Lebanon, that we are doing different waves and different layers. One layer is to get rid of the heads and, if you like, the military orders, and then we're going to go for the infrastructure, then we're going to go for further economic pressure, and continuation of this would actually make change. Ironically, at the first step, at the first point, Trump claimed that, or at least the US administration claimed that the US had no role in this. Then Trump said that, no, we knew about it. but we did not do anything ourselves. Continuously, what we have seen is that this kind of action would not be possible without any support or without the hand of the US and other Israeli allies within the region. It is not something that Israel can actually pull off on its own. Also, it's with some of the attacks, it's clear that it cannot be taking place from Israel. It must have been taking place closer to the borders in Iran, if not within. And as a result, everybody understood that all of the talk about Israel actually acting unilaterally did not have any basis for it, and there was no basis for it. The evil this time was named as the Islamic Republic, and the idea was that the Islamic Republic is the one that it is, according to the previous Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali. It was the case that is the head of the octopus, and rather than going after the tentacles, they must go for the head. And therefore, the idea was to go for an attack, all-scale or full-scale attack on Iran. The idea was put forward as going for the nuclear facilities. Then it was the military facilities. Now we're saying it's going towards the infrastructure, and the claims that Israel has been able to actually be successful in all of those. The attacks that have taken place are immense. The obvious issues with regard to the spread of the information as what is true or not is obviously very difficult, because each part has got some censorship, whether Islamic Republic or that of the Israeli state, and they let some of the information to come through. Some of the information is coming without their noticing, and the expectation that Netanyahu had put forward was that we will actually free the people of Iran from the tyrants that are ruling it. And the rhetoric was that it is time for the Iranian public to rise and therefore free itself. And in this case, Israel is, through its actions, is actually aiding the people of Iran. Over the first few hours, after naming all of the main heads of the military and people who they were never actually well-known people in terms of the popularity. It was more the case that some of the people that many of us had seen in variety of murderous acts were killed, were named first. And the idea was to say that Israel is actually targeting only some of the heads of the Islamic Republic very soon. And it didn't even take a few hours before everybody saw that this is not the case of individuals. It's not the case that a sniper goes somewhere and does something, but it's more the case that the bombs go around. The number of dead is in the region of hundreds, and that is all has been said. Iranian regime has not said exactly the total numbers, because they say all they have said is there are a large number of women and children among the people who have been killed. But we do know that the numbers actually are in hundreds, because every location, soon as a bomb falls down, it's not just one part of a block or one little bit. It actually produces devastation across the whole place. It reminds you of the idea that, if we remember some years ago, when the US forces, defense forces, were claiming that they have got precision laser bomb precisions when they actually attack Iraq, and there would be only individuals in some places that would be killed, and we all saw the devastation. It's not possible to do that, and everybody knows that's not possible. And the idea is to actually produce a huge amount of mayhem and problems within the society. In addition, Israel has today, the IDF has issued a memorandum and has put it in the Farsi or Iranian social media that anyone who lives anywhere near the areas where there are military or places where they know is associated with military, they better leave. It's even worse than what you would have seen during the time that they used to issue these notions, even with maps in Lebanon or that in Gaza. This time they have not even named a time, they haven't said when, and they haven't said which locations. There's no map or anything, as they used to do before. And what's more is that the places and the locations of these areas that Israel says they want to hit is not something that many people are aware of. They're actually built in very much of the populated areas or different places that are not necessarily with a big sign that this is a place for the Ministry of Defense. So no one knows who's going to be hit and where is going to be hit. It could be the central bank and therefore all of the people who live in the area. It could be a place that they say could be associated. It could be the place where someone lives in there. Anywhere is a target. Iran has actually responded with some rockets and ballistic missiles, etc. The Israeli side obviously has got its own censorship in terms of what has been hit or what has not been hit. But this tit for tat is something that both sides seem to be very much happy and content to continue. Currently, Israel has put the 15-day as the time in terms of the situation to continue for certain. But there is no indication whether they would even keep that and whether that is the notion. Insofar as Iran is concerned, is similar. So there is an idea that this is not something that could be done in one day or two. The idea that the Islamic Republic is going to melt away is not the case. This is not a country, and it's not. They actually been ruling the country for nearly 50 years, and they are a big state of a big population in the region. So it's not like a given organization in another country. They are the state, and therefore their position is very different, and the situation is very different. The idea that Israel was putting forward that if there is a war, as a result of this war, you would be able to see that people of Iran would rise, it is absolutely insane, because everyone knows that once you're under bombs, it's not the case that people start thinking, oh, let me just go against my government and let's rebel. Historically, there has been only one place, and that's after 3 years of World War, where people were able to turn the guns the other way, and that was in a different situation over a century ago. We all know that the whole idea of the attacks of the current Israeli state on Iran is not to get rid of the Islamic Republic, despite the rhetoric that they have. We know the West has not got the idea of regime change in their hand, and that's not their intention. The idea is, at the moment, to go, a situation day by day to some extent, it seems, rather than actually having some sort of an agenda of knowing where is the end. The war that has actually started, uh, nobody knows the scope of it. Nobody knows the outcome of it. Nobody knows what could happen. And this is something which the whole region is actually facing. It's not something which is about Iran. Everyone knows this is going to affect the whole region and all of the agendas that the whole states, reactionary ones, all of them in the region had any plans for. This actually brings more mayhem, more crisis, and more uncertainty. Insofar as Iran is concerned, we have had this year one of the highest rates in terms of the number of protests that have been taking place. We're talking within the last few months, on average, about tens of protests and at least 1 to 2 strikes a day. Protest movements had been growing. They were pushing forward. They are actually putting pressure on the Islamic Republic. They had to, after the main protest that was taking place with regard to the women life and freedom, the Islamic Republic noticed that they can't pass any laws to stop people and forcing them to actually be as they wanted to do. And the opposition effectively, socially, across the whole society had pushed the Islamic Republic to the extent that they can't even enforce their own law, and they publicly decided not to enforce their own law. In this scenario, since the attacks have taken place, we see more security forces on the streets. We see more and more spread of the idea that anyone who is seeing anybody doing anything can be regarded as an aid and a bit, if you like, support for the Israel and its attacks. And we're seeing a growing presence of the security forces and pushing back of any idea of protests in the streets in Iran. That's on one hand. At the same time, over the last 48 hours, what we have seen is a change. What is reported, widely reported, is the case that it is not the scenario where more and more people are coming onto the street, and it only took about 48 hours for everybody to see and revolting against the Islamic Republic, though they want to actually get rid of the Islamic Republic. It's at the time where, under the bombardment, under the uncertainty and the mayhem that is being created, under the situation that everyone sees, there are going to be more and more pressure and more destruction. We're seeing queues, large queues forming in parts to the west, where people are trying to go outside Iran towards Turkey. There is no planes going in or outside Iran. People who have actually traveled in or out of Iran are stuck. They cannot go back. Everybody sees a future which is possible war. And this in itself means that no one actually feels safe within the country. The destruction and what they actually term areas which are related to the military forces covers a large number of different industries, and therefore futures work, etc., are not easy to see. The increase and the devaluation of the currency in Iran has meant higher and higher prices at the time, again, that it is difficult to see to effectively form some sort of a protest against your boss or the place of your work, where you don't know if you're going to go outside or going home and whether you're going to come alive the next day, has actually meant a total uncertainty and inability to be able to say what can or cannot be done. The situation which has been created is not a question that whether Iran has the ability to militarily sort of counter what Israel has. This is not the issue. The issue is not even the case that to what extent can the Israeli forces actually pound more and more places. But the main issue is that this means a complete disruption of the life of a society which was moving ahead and putting pressure on the Islamic Republic, has come to a situation about how do I keep myself alive? And this keeping myself alive is not something that anyone can actually do on their own. It's not something that the union or groups of workers on their own can provide. Therefore, what we are seeing now also is the uncertainty and the dangers that we had talked about before. The idea of one rise of nationalism on one hand. We're seeing at the same time protests which were taking place on the street have become or feel that they are actually being sidelined, and there are more security forces that they can to deal with. And in this scenario, the opposition, so far as the Islamic Republic is concerned, the right-wing opposition is calling for more and more and more pressure on Iran militarily. And they say that the situation is people of Iran should rise, which is effectively means that they want a war scenario rather than actually anywhere that people can be involved. Insofar as part of the left is concerned, and when I say left, I'm using it very loosely, those who at the moment suddenly remembered, oh, it's time to topple the Islamic Republic, they're just showing how much of a sideline and irrelevant they are in terms of the life of the society. What we have called for is recognition of the fact that this war has got nothing to do with the nuclear issue. It's got nothing to do with the position of the Islamic Republic and what happens in the Middle East. This issue is literally something which is the outcome of an attack directly against them, directly against the people in Iran on one hand. Two, it's part of the deadlock that Israel is under, part of the deadlock of the crisis in the Middle East, something which is not cannot be resolved by Israel, but Israel is also part of that problem. And that is something which you can see in terms of what has happened with regard to the actions that Israel has done. Thirdly, what we have asked is for people to actually start forming their own places, their own shelters, their own defense against the attacks, calling for a complete and immediate end of the war, uh, calling for a complete end of the bombardments. Immediate ending literally is what has been desired across the country. And this is the only way that we can actually see any form of safety for people in terms of what is happening in Iran. Condemnation of the Israel action and end and complete cessation of the situation of the war and bombardment are the main things. And we all know it started with Palestine, then it was Lebanon, then it was Syria, now is Iran, tomorrow is somewhere else. This situation of mayhem is nothing to do with the position, or if you like, the reasoning, or how correct or incorrect are the claims of the Islamic Republic. This is much bigger than this. This is the crisis which is happening in Middle East. There is no answer. The deadlock at the moment is something which Israel, and I think to a large extent, the world powers are facing in terms of inability to find a solution to the situation and the crisis they're in. And people of Iran are paying actually the price of the failure of the militarism that was supposed to be ruling across the Middle East. This idea that everything could be resolved by law force, the gendarme of the area could be the US, was not something that was expected to happen after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Prosperity was not supposed to be about this. The whole idea was that there would be some degree of reaching agreement and sharing. And we have seen in the past couple of decades, at least, that this has not happened. This is the same situation, is continuing. And this war is effectively like the people of Palestine who were paying the price of it on one way. People of Lebanon paid it in one way. Syria was another idea of this. Now the defeat of that deadlock is fallen on the people of Iran, and they're supposed to pay the price for it. This situation has to end, and the only answer literally here is stopping this carnage, and this would be the best scenario for us as workers and people who want to make a change in Iran. We all know, insofar as the society is concerned, the process of actually making a change would only work in our favor in situations where that progress can take place. We always knew scenarios of war, scenarios of destruction, scenarios of mayhem only opens up the room for more right-wing or similar continuation of the situation in Iran, rather than actually making a major change. So calling for an end to the war, it's not a question of saying at the moment how good or bad the Islamic Republic is. It's not a question of saying whether it is this or that government that does X or Y. The situation is to end the war. Israel has carried out the war. So that must be ended immediately, and it must be condemned. At the moment, we can see the outcome of this, and these are some of the dangers that we have mentioned. The idea that who can stand against Israel, you can see there was a protest in Paris yesterday. Similar protest was taking place in London yesterday. We saw now this time the flags of the Islamic Republic are going to go up when the protest is about the condemnation of Israel. The whole idea that the situation that Israel has created, the situation that they have created in the Middle East, is actually posing problem. And I think this problem is much, much bigger than the Islamic Republic. This problem is much bigger than what is being portrayed as the problem. And the continuation of this war, the further mayhem that it would cause, would not resolve the issue. What we will see is further destruction, further growth of reactionary forces, further pressure, and further sidelining and suppression that we will see in Iran. And the outcome of it is becoming more and more clear, even after 24 hours to 48 hours since the first bomb that fell in Iran. And the only answer is complete stopping to this and a complete end to this carnage. Let me stop here. I think I've taken my half an hour and let everybody come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Aman, for a very enlightening opening contribution, containing lots of new ideas and approaches, principally that the war that's now underway, that as a result of Israel's action, isn't about degrading nuclear facilities. It's about many, many other issues, including the Palestinian question. All of that is incorporated in this attack that Israel has conducted. And as Aman has said, the war has to end. Number one, the attack by Israel on Iran has to end. It's not about regime change. It's not about degrading nuclear facilities. It's a far, far wider issue. So he also raised issues about the role of the working class and the organized labor movement internationally, principally the actions that have been taken in a number of countries, most recently in France, in a port near Marseille. So it's the workers in the ports and the airports. If they take action, Israel can't import arms and weaponry into Israel and for the IDF. So there's lots of issues which have been raised. Now, comers have lots of questions to ask, and this is the opportunity to ask them. They're also free to make contributions to the general discussion. And the purpose of this analysis here, as it is at all WIN meetings, is to try and explore ways in which these issues can be raised in the labor movement, and consequently ways in which these issues can be resolved internationally. So if comers want to speak, they can either indicate with the electronic hand, or if they want to wave around on the screen, I'll see that. So the first hand that's up is Matthew. So go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah. Thanks, Comrade Aman, for that very interesting introduction. I think really it's also, I mean, it is about, as you say, the crisis of imperialism itself and the crisis of imperial control of the Middle East, which, I mean, obviously, within Israel itself, and what we're seeing obviously is the breakdown of the function of chunks of the society. I mean, as has been said, there's now got to the point where the IDF itself cannot summon its own reservists. That hundreds of thousands of people are refusing to report back to the army. That the army in Gaza now is operating on minimal manpower. At the same time, the week of this attack on Iran, there's an effort to try and dissolve the Knesset and bring down the Netanyahu government, which is an expression, that obviously Netanyahu takes this action at the point at which the society itself is disintegrating. So we can see this, but at the same time also we see, in terms of the imperial powers, that we're seeing, clearly the crisis in terms of, all of the imperial powers are tied into this project, the Zionist project. All of them are all the European countries and so on are up to their necks in it and support it and see it as vital. I mean, even down to, say, the Irish government recently, which ordered its representatives in the Dáil to vote against ending the sale of Israeli war bonds. Interestingly enough, the central banker himself, the governor of the Bank of Ireland, said, well, I'm a central banker. I'm not subject to the genocide convention, so that's okay then. I don't mind selling bonds to finance a genocide. That's not a problem for me. Hopefully he's wrong. But the thing is also, the thing itself starts to fall apart. So we see also this week we'll see the conference of the UN conference in New York, in which there's an open conflict between the Americans and the French. And the Americans obviously been around. The conference is actually being organised by the French and the Saudi Arabians. And so the Americans have obviously been around twisting arms, because the French originally were going to recognise the state of Palestine, and there was even talk of the UK recognising the state of Palestine at that conference, and then they've now backed off from that. But at the same time, you're looking at a growth of revulsion among billions of people in the world towards Israel itself. And we're starting to see a move, as you say, very, very slowly, unfortunately, by the working class to reject moving material to Israel. I mean, I think the interesting thing about that, about the development at Fos, the main port of Marseille, is that actually the research that was done for that was done by a series of people, including folk in Ireland and elsewhere. And they pointed out these movements that have been going on. and other movements from Spain and so on and so forth. And of course, they're just basically ignored by the governments. And actually, they spent their time digging through Israeli customs documents to find what was being imported to Israel from where, and pointed out that these were the movements, and therefore they alerted the dockers and said, "You've got to stop this." And they did. And that's a very positive thing. I mean, the negative thing, if you're from Britain, is of course the British unions are far worse than anywhere else. We basically have the major union leaderships are imperialist and genocidal in nature. I mean, this is not to say that obviously that's different for the activists, etc. But the leaderships, the main unions are. So in those terms, it's an extremely, it's the depth of the crisis, and the question is, can the working class actually, start to manifest itself in these terms? Two, how much do the imperialists begin to split? Three, can Israel? How long can Israel sustain itself under these, the disintegration of its society and of its economy? And then, of course, what's the response in Middle East itself? And what we're seeing, obviously, in Egypt and Jordan and so on, is the ability of the regimes, which are, of course, there because they serve US imperialism, nakedly so, to clamp down on the maintain a clampdown on the population, as we've seen in Egypt. I mean, huge popular support, obviously, for the march. I mean, the convoy from Tunisia was greeted, going through Libya, which is being wrecked by imperialists, obviously. It was greeted by the population, who gave them free food, free fuel, and in many cases joined the convoy. So people can see what signed on, but then of course, I mean, it then becomes this whole issue, of Egypt, in which you've got like at least tens of thousands of political prisoners have been there since the end of the Arab Spring, and more have been locked up since. They're trying to maintain the lid on. You've got a similar situation in Jordan, although not as acute. But I mean, so the problem for the Jordanian regime, of course, is that 60% of the population is Palestinian. It's huge in those terms, and you are looking at the real possibility of an explosion. But it's then what political direction does that explosion take? Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. The next speaker to indicate is Roger.
Yeah, thanks, comrade. I really, all I want to do is to raise a question. I mean, this is the time when it's very tempting to come in with cavalier sort of assertions that no, revolution is coming and so on. But I do seriously want to kind of reflect on the experiences of similar wars in the past and the contrast between the immediate mood at the beginning of hostilities and the aftermath, which is often very, very different. So, I mean, I would start by saying, look, wars, again, if I don't want to be too dogmatic about it. I'm sure there are other comrades who could come in with counter arguments, but I'm putting this for the sake of discussion. I'm particularly interested to know, to hear what Aman thinks about this. Look, wars are always popular at first. I remember reading Trotsky's account at the time of the outbreak of the First World War, the huge wave of chauvinism that developed, even in places where there'd been big movements against the war. I mean, we know what happened with the Socialist International, that only 2 years before the outbreak of war, this was a mass organization of workers, organized workers in Germany and Britain and France and around the world, who met together and said, look, in the event of war, we will organize a general strike, we'll oppose it and so on. But once the war started, we saw that there was a surge of chauvinism. And that's not really surprising, because people feel under direct personal threat to themselves and their families, and they see their own armed forces as giving them protection against a hostile, foreign, alien enemy. But what did we see at the end of the First World War? We saw the collapse of all the nearly all of the dynasties of Europe. We had the collapse of the Hohenzollerns and the Habsburgs and the Ottomans and the Russian Empire, the Romanovs, all except the British monarchy. But all the ruling houses, all the most conservative forces of Europe were overthrown in mass uprisings. And that's not the only example. I mean, I'm thinking of so many more. The Franco-Prussian War, which then produced the Paris Commune. The Russo-Japanese War in 1904, which directly led to the 1905 revolution in Russia. Even the Second World War, which at the end of the Second World War there was a wave of radicalization, which was betrayed, of course, by both Social Democratic and Stalinist forces, but led to Popular Front governments in France and Italy, led to the unexpected victory and on a massive scale of the Labour government in Britain, and the pressure of which led to mass nationalisation, creation of the health service, the National Health Service, and so on. So I mean, I'm not just kind of making cavalier assertions that surely this is going to lead to revolution necessarily. But I remember very much Aman he's given occasional reports to this gathering on the revolutionary developments in Iran. I remember 2 or 3 years ago being absolutely elated and almost shocked by the videos that he showed of factory gate meetings. This is before the women's movement of against the the hijab issue, but there was mass demonstrations and strikes that we hadn't even heard about, or most of us it hadn't received much publicity around the world. But obviously not just a revolutionary situation developing, but actually a proletarian-based revolution developing, with all the implications that could mean. So I just wanted to raise the question, and I don't, as I say, we don't want to just be sort of complacent about it and don't worry, revolution is coming. But when you see, even in Israel, which is, of course, has the most, probably, a massive majority, overwhelming majority of the population are gripped with chauvinism, with Zionist delusions, with an absolutely racist hatred of Palestinians and the Arab populations generally, and so on. But we see there too that nevertheless the government is absolutely unpopular. At least that's the latest information that I have about it. That there's that actually Netanyahu was part of the motivation, and of course he couldn't have done it without the support of American imperialism. But nevertheless, his personal motivation was to stay in power, to avoid jail, to avoid prosecution for massive fraud and embezzlement. And he did that by making a link, making an alliance with fascists, and fascists who had very, very slender support, almost no support within the electorate, within the population. But he made an alliance with them in order to patch up a majority in the Knesset. To do that, he had to give in to all their demands, including this racist, genocidal, monstrous policy in Gaza, and at the same time, this, as Aman has said, attacking Lebanon, attacking Syria, attacking Iran in particular. And all of this, of course, with the connivance and collusion of American imperialism. Otherwise, he could not have got away with it, and it wouldn't have, it would not have been feasible. But in that situation, we now have I was hoping that Matthew would say more of this because he's very well informed on it, and maybe he'll come back. But the fact of almost mutinies within the IDF, of whole sections of it's a conscript army, but as I understand it anyway, and yet large numbers. We're talking about thousands, if not tens, or is it even hundreds of thousands? But anyway, huge numbers of conscripts who said we're not going, not 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 out of kind of fraternal solidarity maybe with the population of Gaza, but they just don't want to be involved in the in this mess. And there's mass exodus, mass emigration from of the Israeli population who are just getting out because they can't see any future. And we see also a refusal by again, Matthew will help me with this, but IDF intelligence units, again, thousands of them, who said we refuse to participate in this war. And surely, and there is, and of course, there's the uh, repeated demonstrations again and again of the supporters of the hostages, families of the hostages, who have massive sympathy, of course, within the population, who demonstrate again and again and say, "Look, stop the war, make a deal with Hamas, get the hostages freed." So with all of this, I'm not saying that the Israeli population are suddenly converts to socialist internationalism, but the strains and the conflicts within Israeli society are creating a condition where you could see that there'd be a complete collapse of the Netanyahu regime. And I'm sure one way or other, Netanyahu is going to come to a very sticky end because he's really his base in the population. You know, he can keep the fever going from day to day by constant military adventures like he's doing now. But how long can that last? And how long can he keep that up? And how long can the Israeli economy and the Israeli population withstand the pressures of that? So there's a few points for consideration. Thanks, comrades.
Thank you, Roger. Comrades would have noticed that Roger has raised some interesting questions that need to be explored in the context of this discussion. So comrades should bear in mind the importance of examining issues and just digging into the surface to find where the real truth lies. So interesting questions there. Now we have Temos, followed by Norma.
Well, I think I shall continue from where Roger stopped and say that we should not look at these wars as isolated incidents or in isolation in the areas that they are taking place. There is a tremendous instability in the world today that was started a long time ago. It has been built up from 2008 to the COVID pandemic and the collapse really of all democratic pretense of all the main ruling elites in every single country, almost. The war in we cannot see the war in Ukraine in isolation. I mean, Putin was forced into a corner, and he had to save himself with some sort of action. So he tried this and there. It reminds me also of how Netanyahu went into war. He was he was facing huge demonstrations. He was being taken to court for corruption, and so this war is part of his weakness, part of his failure to stabilize his government in a non-autocratic way. All this reminds me of how Thatcher picked on the Falklands War to to save herself in the elections. Wars in general, they take place normally under either a really big strength among from the warring nations, or from a big weakness. And today we see that America doesn't know where it's going. Europe is even worse. Israel is hitting everywhere and turning everything into a question of strength. But everywhere, everybody is losing the moral ground to rule by ruling with barbaric methods. And if we look at the Arab countries, how long can they keep up the suppression of their populace when they are seen to be abandoning the Palestinians to this fate? How long can the Europeans sustain support for the governments they do when they see what they are doing everywhere in Palestine, when they see Israel, in fact, to cash on the Holocaust for doing all these actions. So my feeling is that everywhere there is instability. Everywhere there is a possible conflagration. I wouldn't speak about socialist revolution, but revolution I would. I mean, it will only take the toppling of one of these governments to see these protests mushrooming into a much wider revolutionary movement. As I said, there is nobody there to guide this revolution at the moment. And there is nobody there to give us hope that these revolutions will take us somewhere better than we are being led today. In the Arab countries, it could be the nightmare of Islamic risings. In Europe, it might be the nightmare of fascist and the extreme right. But it could be otherwise. And these things, I think, are some issues that we have to discuss. How are these revolutions going to develop? Because they are going to develop. And how can we intervene and make a difference if possible? I don't know. In Cyprus now, and probably in the whole world, there are two narratives about how the Israel-Iran war is going to unfold. One is Israel cannot make it because Iran is a big country, it has huge resources and huge population, and Israel is going to break its nose. The other is there is no comparison between the strength, the military possibilities of these countries as these tit-for-tat events have shown, that Israel is much more sophisticated. It has much more support from the United States and the West. So Iran has no chance. So you have two completely different narratives, which I feel they feel that they are just wishful thinking from their supporters. And but the truth is not there. I think Aman said that you cannot possibly predict the outcome of a war, and war always throws up surprises. And it is these surprises that we should expect to happen either way, good or bad.
Thank you, Timos. Norma, you're next.
Thanks very much, Aman and Roger and all people and Demos and others who contributed. So I try to provide or contribute with 3 points, perhaps summarizing for myself. First, the place where I am, France, Paris, yesterday, several of you mentioned, it was a real, there are always said they were increasing manifestation for Palestine, for Gaza, against Israel war side, and also movements anti-war. But the manifestation yesterday was particularly singular, important, but also because of the participation. And this was before and without knowing. It was organizing without knowing the fact that Israel were planned to make the attack against Iran. And so it was the fact that for the first time, the trade unions manifested with unitary objectives in this problem, and really very active. And so the participation of working class and trade unions in particular, but not only CGT, which take active part in the dockers in Marseille and so on, as you know, but that make a real positive point, which was pointed out by from different sides. It's not just optimist view of this reality. Now, and even Shewi's bloc against Zionism and for Palestine, who manifested more publicly and more strongly. A second point is about Aman, one of the points, very interesting, Aman mentioned, and also Roger, is Aman said it was this attack to Iran was not because of to attack the objectives of the nuclear program of Iran. We know that, at least several of us know, that Iran program is not in the set accomplished. It have just etaps or items, but it's not accomplished. And then Israel, as far as I know, prophylactically said, attacked these points and the people, the scientists, the responsibles, who knows about who knows? I mean, who are minds and power forces to develop that, and really they make intelligence, and then they attack it, all these objectives, strategic military objectives. Israel attacked Lebanon, Syria, and now Iran. I mean, they want the Middle East. Aman said it's not just because that, and I mean, I agree, it's not just because that. I trying to understand which is, at this moment, which is the objective, real objective, if any, besides force, of Netanyahu or people who are with him. Because this is, as Roger said, when there was in the past, taking the historic perspective, when it was a war, there was also change of systems or but this period, and in the sense Israel is playing, in quotation playing, is with nuclear arms or with nuclear programs, even with the drones and so on. So it's very dangerous. We know all what produced in all the region, not only Middle East, I mean, in the European countries in which we are. So the question, and in France in particular now, we are seeing from just 2 days before, all this pressure, people, I mean, we are anti-war. I mean, we produced just 1 week ago, I mean, Wynne and also Militant, Raymond, and so on, these papers, anti-war and so on, because Ukraine, because etc. But now they are saying, I mean, the power are saying, we need to now be protected. There will be plans. They will, I mean, all system in which we are under pressure when we go to the streets because more controls, more security, and so on. And that also, I mean, from the point of view of freedom, is a problem. We are seeing now, I mean, just from this weekend, for people who are observing, I mean, of course. And the third point, so what is doing Israel now? Want Israel, I'm saying, the power of Netanyahu, he won't really go to the force, whatever be the situation, even for its own population, with some said saving, God saving us, or some kind of sectarism who could push him to such extreme situation, because I don't think some other country is instructing Israel, country of imperialism, if you want, imperialist country, instructing Israel, please do that or please do that. I think we are facing somewhat a new situation, which is, as several of you said, is not uncontrollable, saying uncertainty, instability, unpredictability, and so on, and the background. And so the third point, I mean, as a consequence of that, is that all that is also influencing the movements, the working class, the social movements, the human rights, the freedoms movements, in which each country, or with and also the global situation, is growing or is producing, because all that also is limited. I mean, there is this background of the war and unpredictability, uncertainty, instability, which also, in some case, limits this organization. But as a final word, I should say that from the point of view of the trade unions in the different levels, which I little bit know, and including the trade union of scientists, and there is a big involvement, increasing in the situation, in this situation of Gaza, Palestine, anti-war, and nuclear weapons or nuclear situations today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norma. We need to explore a bit this issue of the instability of all the regimes in the region, all of them. The Arab monarchies, which are absolute monarchies with no democratic rights for their citizens. The crisis which still continues in Syria. The instability in Yemen. And the instability within Israel, which has been highlighted by Roger and other comrades. It's worth noting also, by the way, that even though Netanyahu was in court recently on the corruption charges, he was being interviewed in court. But in addition to that, which obviously drives him forward in terms of the war, Netanyahu believes and is committed to the annexation of the West Bank and Gaza, and he's committed to incorporating these into Israel. That's his ambition. And he won't stop the war against Palestinians until that ambition is accomplished. He's made that perfectly clear. So you sometimes hear vague discussions about what's the day after, what's they're going to agree to. Netanyahu just wants to incorporate all of Palestine, what we now know as Palestine, into Israel, and to drive the Palestinian people out of the region. In fact, the ideas of Jabotinsky, the early fascist Zionist leader, and of Ben-Gurion, who was a military advocate, are now back full sway across Israel, even though there's a discontent amongst the military people. Some generals recently came out openly against the war, saying this war has been conducted for political purposes. So that instability needs to be examined. And of course, as Aman will explain, I'm sure, further, the instability that exists across Iran. And just another point we need to have a look at. You sometimes hear in the international discussion, what is the world doing? What's the international community doing about the genocide? What is the world community? Israel is an outpost of American imperialism in the Middle East. The USA is defending Israel for practical, political, and economic purposes. Israel is a supplier of weaponry as well as being a security for imperialism in the region. So when people talk about what's the world doing, there is no such thing as the world in that general sense. Israel is doing what it's doing for its interests. America is defending Israel for its interests. And then countries like Germany and France supplying, or Italy, huge amounts of armaments to Israel. So the world community, as people talk about what's the world doing, we need to dig more deeply into that and expose what capitalism and imperialism means in terms of peace. But as Aman said, ending the war is #1 priority. And we need to just look a bit more closely about the unstable regimes that are fermenting and are involved in prolonging this war. Now, I raise these points, I know it might seem like an abuse of the chair, but it's to stimulate discussion of these issues amongst comrades. Before you come back, Matthew, I see your hand there. John Byrne wants to come in first.
Yes, thank you, Finn. Just a few brief points. Recently, we've had a number of military experts being interviewed about the present conflict that's going on between Israel and Iran. But none of the interviewers asked, in my opinion, probably the most important question. Isn't it irresponsible of Israel to attack Iran only 2 days before Iran was supposed to be in negotiations with America about the future of the Iranian nuclear project? And they seem to avoid that question like the plague. The other point I would make is 2 to 3 weeks ago, there was a whole rash of resolutions, of, if you like, parliamentary statements. Like in Britain, we had Keir Starmer speaking to Parliament, saying that Israel was going too far, that the present situation in Gaza must stop, that they must have a proper humanitarian approach to the people of Gaza and allow in shipments of aid, medical aid, water, and all that. And Israel has totally ignored that. Now, in the last 24 hours, all that you get is a rash of statements from the likes of Keir Starmer and all the leaders that were, if you like, coming to a conclusion that Israel was going too far, saying Israel has the right to defend itself. Well, if you like, Israel actually went on the attack on Friday and attacked a whole raft of installations in Iran, including top military leaders, top scientists, etc. And I feel myself that this, I think, is leading to a certain amount of disgust, because if France and Saudi Arabia get together to say how terrible it is, what's going on, I think there'll be a feeling of utter disgust, particularly with Saudi Arabia, that hosted a conference only 3 weeks ago where they were all going to make billions out of the Middle East. Not a word about Gaza, not a word about Palestine, just how much money all the Gulf states and America were going to make, and not a word about Netanyahu, who's an indicted war criminal, up for genocide, up for ethnic cleansing and all the rest of it. I personally feel that the situation we're in at the moment is one where it would take something to snap. Perhaps there'll be the one country that has, or the two countries that have had demonstrations in the Arab world against Israel's stand, Yemen, which Yemen, anything can happen in Yemen. It won't make the slightest bit of difference. But in Jordan, there have been demonstrations. If something in Jordan was to go, then that could be like the Arab Spring. It could lead to a whole rash of, if you like, I wouldn't say insurrections, but definitely of defiance against their governments. And that's my feeling, that it's a real tinderbox. At the moment, if you like, it's the old saying about bolting down the safety valve, and that's what's happening. The safety valve has been bolted down. And we had one idiot of a general on the BBC being interviewed about the present situation. And I think they did touch on the fact that Israel acted prematurely in attacking Iran. And he came out with the nonsense that Tony Blair came out with on Iraq, that in reality they had to do it because Iran, in this case, would be able to attack Israel with atom bombs within the next 48 hours. The same as Tony Blair had his thing, that Iraq was able within 16 minutes to attack Britain because it had the capability. All a load of nonsense. All we're still looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and 10 years on, we're still in the same position of not being able to find any. So that's my feeling, that we're in a real tinderbox situation, particularly in the Middle East, because what is happening now is that Gaza used to be referred to as the biggest open-air jail in the world. Gaza now has been referred to as a concentration camp, and definitely the treatment dished out to Gazans by the Zionists in Israel is similar to a concentration camp. So I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Thank you, John. Matthew, you're on again there.
Yeah, thanks, comrades. No, there's a few things. I think people, we should understand Israel as like the attack dog of imperialism, and the thing is that there's huge degree of integration in terms of between the imperialist powers and Israel in terms of military terms, in terms of intelligence, and so on. I mean, if you look at the Americans actually, as in October 2023, after October 7th, the Americans actually lent the Israelis a Marine general to plan the assault on Gaza. You can see there's a constant interpass. there's a huge supply line of military material, particularly from the US, but also from Europe, of course, but particularly from the US. There are ships that go every month carrying thousands of tons of military material from the US. There's been various efforts to try and stop these because they used to go via Spain, but the Spanish dockers Algeciras managed to stop them. They currently go through via Tangier, and there's been efforts in Morocco to stop that. And that's just the military gear. There's another set of ships that you carry bombs. I mean, all of this stuff is provided. Israel isn't like some small country. It's actually carrying, all the supply, etc., of the imperialists. And again, I mean, if you look at the integrated, what happened in, because we should also look at this attack on Iran as part of the development towards World War III, which is what they're aiming for at this point. This is the drive. And we can see the parallel. We should look at the parallel between what happened in Russia-Ukraine war and what happened in Iran. I mean, in Russia-Ukraine, of course, there was this. You've seen all this the dancing around on TV in terms of this attack on Russian air bases. Now, of course, that's Ukrainian in notion only. Of course, that's actually carried out by Western intelligence agencies in particular, and apparently led by the British. The same tactic, or very nearly the same tactic, was used in Iran, actually. The use of trucks with drones, and in this case, attacking in particular the Iranian air defense system, because obviously the first time Israel attempted to attack Iran, it became clear the air defense system of Iran was of a reasonable standard, so they had to destroy it before they could attack it. But that was carried out. That's carried out by imperialism, not Israel alone. And we can see, I mean, this all of this goes through. In political terms, it's a warning to the population of the world, the nature of imperialist politicians. That these, barbarism is now the order of the day. That, I mean, the things that are being done, in terms of attacking hospitals, attacking aid queues, et cetera, are the things that imperialism is fine carrying out. And the politicians that we've got are entirely, happy to see that kind of barbarism. That's the sort of people. They don't turn a hair for that. Doesn't make any difference to them. And that's the kind of people you're dealing with, and people should take that really a very serious warning. I think the other thing, of course, as I say, is the disintegration of Israel. So, as Roger was pointing out, the thing is, if you look at the actual what's been said, the Israeli press. Of course, the other thing we've got is the fact that our media, of course, the imperialist media is basically been essentially a bunch of third-rate propagandists, because you just can't get any news out of most of it. And you have to, so you've got, there's various media in parts of the Arab world, and also, of course, ironically, the Israeli media is far better than any of the others. And the Israeli media has actually pointed out, that at least 100,000 IDF reservists have signed letters saying they won't go back to and that, again, that must represent a far wider trend within the society. You've got an epidemic of PTSD, among vets of the IDF. I mean, people going mad, killing themselves, killing other people, because obviously they're just the nature of what they've done and what they've seen. You've got situations, as I say, that where the resistance in Gaza is reporting that they're seeing IDF units of basically stripped to the bone because they haven't got enough people to run them anymore. So in those terms, a real as I say, real desperate crisis, and of course this mass immigration that you've got. I mean, I've seen reports, of hundreds of thousands of people leaving Israel, and going to places, wherever, either where they've got passports for in Europe or the US or whatever else. So in those terms, I mean, a huge crisis in the society itself. So it's breaking down. It's also sort of interesting that one of the responses of the Iranian towards the Iranian attack on Tel Aviv. I saw that somebody wrote in the dust of one of these rocket strikes, how long, basically, how long is this going to happen for? Why are we going to put up with this? So in those terms, it's clearly on the point. And this is why Netanyahu's done it now. The other thing, of course, that's notable about this, of course, is the Israelis. One, never, if you ever sign anything, never sign anything with the Israelis because they always break it. So two, never become an interlocutor with the Israelis. They tend to kill you. I mean, if you look at all the people who've attempted to negotiate with the Israelis from wherever, they get killed. And so mostly quite brutally. I mean, obviously, they attempt to kill any leader of anything. I mean, you can see, and they don't care who's there in the way either. I mean, if you look at the killing of Nasrallah in Beirut, I mean, they used 82,000-pound bombs and demolished several entire blocks, residential blocks with people in them, and they didn't care. They don't care. Imperialism doesn't care. So in those terms, yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. I don't see other comrades indicating it is to speak. If that's the case, we'll go back to Aman to summarize the discussion. It's been a very good discussion, but yeah, Aman, nobody else has indicated a desire to speak. So can you summarize the points that have been raised?
Sure. Can I? I'll try to summarize, but there are a few points which I thought probably are good to be made. Thanks, everybody. Yes. I enjoyed the points raised. I think there are very good points which has to be addressed. Let me start with one thing. I think there is one way of saying what is happening. There is another importance behind this of what is happening so that we know what we're doing. The reason why I started by talking about the crisis of Middle East, and this crisis is actually portrayed now today in this scenario with regard to Iran, or talking about what happened with regard to Syria or Lebanon or the situation which is in Palestine and what Israel is doing, is because there's a fundamental issue with regard to crisis in Middle East. That has not been resolved. When the Berlin Wall fell down, the idea was something different. It continued and became something different. So it is an old thing. This crisis has not been resolved. And because it's not resolved, that keeps coming up in different scenarios, in different situations, with different answers in different locations. That's on one point. One of the major points with regard to that crisis is the issue of Palestine. The issue of Palestine needs to be resolved one way or the other. Israel is actually portraying one way, but it has to be resolved. And the resolution of it is not just because there is no such thing as called land of Palestine. The problem is that the whole Arab world, if you like, from the region, needs an answer. The degradation that they felt needs an answer. And if it doesn't find an answer, something else will brew somewhere else. That's one thing. But why am I pointing to this rather than a historical issue, but more of a case because it has an impact today? Because different states in the region, when it comes to issues of crisis, we saw it during the time of Saddam attack on Kuwait. We see it another way in different scenarios today. Each of these states, to some extent, are expressing themselves and putting their hands on something which is a problem in this region. Israel is saying the problem in this region is the tyranny of the Islamic Republic. Now that rings a bell amongst many. Iran puts the stress on the problems that Israel calls on the issue of the Palestine and the subjugation of Palestinian people and complete degradation, further than that, destruction and carnage that is taking place on Palestinian people. That rings a bell in the Middle East. So each of them is trying to use something that is actually the need or the requirement or an expression, irrespective of whether it is true or not, but it is an issue which is risen in the region. And each of them, therefore, tries to portray itself as a savior. Iran portrays itself as the only force that is actually trying to fight Israel, this one that cannot be controlled. And this is the reason why I said when you saw everywhere else, suddenly the flags of the Islamic Republic goes up. And similarly, when it comes to Israel, is putting his hands on something from Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, Hamas, Yemen, etc., which is something which people in the region have also seen as well. So that's what they're doing. They effectively are providing their own answers, irrespective of whether I agree or disagree, but I'm saying there are issues in there which are socially raised. Now, the issue of Palestine is continuing, and the carnage and genocide is continuing. What can we do? Do something from the international point of view, across everywhere, and the working class from France, US, etc., Italy, and everywhere else who actually have been doing something with regard to pause and stopping them on one hand, and at the same time, in Middle East, we got to do something. So therefore, the idea was to provide a workers' front in there to put a voice which is different to what is being said in the region. That's one thing. Second point, when it comes to the issue, it was clear. I think everybody knew this. It wasn't the Islamic Republic that wanted a full-fledged force. It was clear. It was Israel that was pushing for war. Israel and Netanyahu at this moment does need a war. But I think it goes beyond Netanyahu. That's why I mentioned Naftali, who was the previous prime minister. Before all of these right wings come in place, he said, we got to go for the head of the octopus, which is Iran. Now, to say that this is only an issue, I know that Netanyahu has got a role to play in this. But to actually limit it to Netanyahu, I think this is another issue. If Netanyahu goes away, the next one is still on the same brand. The actual state in Israel is, I quite agree, as an outpost, as a point of presence in the region, is actually portraying certain positions and is also carrying out those positions. So from that point of view, Israel is following a policy. And this policy of war in the region is something which is at the moment has come into contradiction with what many of those reactionary states in the region do not want. There is no way Saudi Arabia can think about its expansion and its program of 2030, etc., if the whole Middle East is in arms and is in burning in place. It doesn't mean that they agree with Iran or they agree with Israel. It's just that the whole Arab bourgeoisie, the whole of those states, are seeing problems with the policies that are taking place. That is real. So therefore, the question is, our answer to this is with regard to the situation, like the attacks which is taking place in Iran, Islamic Republic does not want a war, but a war is not something that it actually sees as its downfall. That's not the case. Everyone knows it's not the downfall of the Islamic Republic. It's not regime change. Israel puts all that rhetoric. The question is not regime change. They will come to the aid of Islamic Republic because the bourgeoisie in Iran doesn't have any alternative. It's the best alternative they've got. The question is bringing it to the table and accepting something. But I think that's the tactics of today. So what is our position? Our fight in terms of what Roger mentioned in terms of the working class has not ceased. We are still on the same thing. We had two things. One, we condemn this war, but further than that, we want an end to it. Two, we want a complete, if you like, producing a dam right in front of the Islamic Republic against any further pressure and transferring the problems that are onto Iran. Why is that important? Because right now, the Islamic Republic has been going on and has been using an excuse. The reason why there is problems, the reason why factories are closing, the reason why there is a poverty, the reason why there is an economic problem is because of the economic embargo. Today, they're saying the reason why we have this problem is because of the attack of the Israel. So therefore, that's another excuse that they got in their hand, which they didn't have previously. We had 8 years of war with Iraq, 1 million dead. We have had that experience of what the war does in terms of not the protests that are not taking place, but sidelining it because it gives an upper hand to the state. So the reason why I was saying why there would be the idea of the nationalism is because Islamic Republic is picking up the pretext of territorial integrity of Iran, because they do know, and that is absolutely true, that there are very many of these pockets of groups of nationalists, etc., that exist in Iran that Israel would arm. So they actually saying, if we are there, we can control this. And therefore, they're going for this idea of nationalism in terms of the integrity of, or if you like, territorial integrity of Iran on one hand, two, the force that can stop Israel. The question is, what is our job? We are not the socialists of the time when everything is good and rosy and peaceful. Whether it is rosy or it's not rosy, whether it is war or not war, our task, routine task doesn't change. What is actually taking place is knowing what they're actually putting as a pretext, therefore we can actually arm against it. What are the things we want? No drop in the current status. We do not agree that the problem of poverty is because of the embargo, although that's an excuse in the Islamic Republic. That's why we wanted to break the economic embargo, because it takes that excuse away. Two, there is no such thing as the Islamic Republic being able to actually withstand this, when I say militarily, because the situation is not a military and doesn't have a military solution. The militarism that is actually taking place across the world, that militarism, the failure of that is actually, the victim of that is the people in Iran at the moment. Similarly, as it was the problem of inability to resolve the issue of the crisis in the Middle East, the Palestinian people have paid for it. The idea behind it is, what do we do? Obviously, our work in terms of struggle, organization, etc., routine work is there, but recognizing the situation has changed. War is not something that would help us. So therefore, we need to make sure that we are actually able to stand against not only the Islamic Republic, but also the right-wing nationalist ones that are actually coming under the name of anti-Islamic Republic and are pro-Israel. And they want a situation like this because that's the only way they can see their role into power. They would not get into power if there are a proper, if you like, free elections in Iran. They would not get into power if it is the case that people have got the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, so therefore they can organize. That's not the way. The only way they can get into power is if there is mayhem. So our job against this right, pro-Israeli, war-seeking opposition is crucial. So that's one of our tasks. Two, identifying and seeking, or if you like, calling on the working class globally to say people in Iran needs defending. Defending not because they are poor, but defending because there is a need to stand against this militarism and its breakdown and the attack that Israel is carrying out and the alternative they're putting for Middle East. So standing up against Israel, expressing solidarity with people who are actually under this new agenda which is taking place across Middle East. Standing against Israel, I think to a large extent, is what we're after. But at the same time, those who actually try to make this a two-polar thing, is it Islamic Republic or is it Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran or Israel, neither of them will provide an answer. The thing about it is, how could we stand against it? I think is to recognize end of the war. End of the war, immediate end of the war, disarms many of the two sides. So therefore, immediate call for an end to the war, immediate end for bombardment, immediate end for tick for tack responses. These are the things which I think are crucial. Situation could change. I think this is clear. No one knows how it's going to change. But I think, is it in our favor? In other words, do we think out of the war we would be in better situation than not the war? I think not the war would be a better situation. But in any case, our job is to change whatever is current. rather than doing this. But knowing what is going on, I think, is a great help to know what we're doing better. Thanks. I think I'll leave it at that. I hope I've answered the points that was raised.
Yeah. Thank you, Aman, for answering or pointing the direction of sources, pointing sources in the direction of solutions to the current war that's happening. So your summing up has been very clear in terms of isolating the principal ideas that emerged in the discussion, and your opening contribution was very illuminating and very informative for the general discussion. And now, like with all WIN meetings, we must now go away and think more deeply about the issues with a view to influencing events. It's not just about ideas, it's about things we can do in our own countries to influence events that are happening in the Middle East. So thank you again, Aman, and thank you for all the comrades who have contributed. Now, and it's been a very high level of discussion. It's been a very thoughtful contribution in general. So, Roger, do you want to make some points about the meeting of WIN next Sunday?
Yes, thanks, comrade. Next week we're discussing a more slow and long-term crisis, if you like, but one which is not sufficiently understood. I myself was not aware of it until I had a discussion with our comrade in France, Raymond Dabord, who's been who's an expert on the question. It's a question, the crisis of underpopulation, because of course it's always been an argument used by the enemies of the working class to say overpopulation is the problem and there's no solution. It's a kind of zero-sum crisis facing humanity, and the reality is that in fact there's a problem of an aging population, of a population crisis which is affecting not only the Western world but in particular the Asia and the world, world humanity generally. So we're very lucky to have Comrade Raymond speaking next week on this question. And on the following week, we're having a Palestinian comrade speaking.
Thank you, Roger. So, comrades should note these two important discussions that are coming up in the next 2 weeks. So, with that, thank you again for your attendance, for your contributions, and see you all at the WIN meeting next Sunday. So, good night, comrades.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, comrades.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good evening.